Hello, everyone. I cannot believe that it is already May. May holds deep meaning for a lot of us. It's API Heritage Month, it's Mental Health Awareness Month, and in Korean communities, it's called 가정의 달, Family Month, a time to reflect on the families we were born into and the ones that we have chosen. And we are thankful for our community here at MSG and for each of you joining us for our special series in our own words. Korean American voices across generations, where we will be sharing honest conversations about navigating through different seasons of life, from childhood to young adulthood, through motherhood, and into later life. And our hope is creating spaces like this is to foster connection, learning, and growth together through conversations that help us feel seen, understood, and less alone. At MSG, we exist to make these spaces possible. Our work is shaped by researchers, clinicians, pastors, and practitioners who understand both the cultural context and the real barriers to mental health care in Korean American communities. Because of that, we have made a commitment to create resources that are not only thoughtful and culturally grounded, but also freely accessible to those who need them the most. But this work is only possible through community. As we begin this May series, we invite you to partner with us, whether by giving to our May fundraiser or becoming a monthly star sponsor. Your support helps sustain this work, allowing us to continue offering conversations like this and equipping families and creating pathway towards healing and connection. So thank you again for being part of a community that chooses to show up, to listen, and to invest in hope and healing together. Thank you again, everyone.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. We're so glad that you're here tonight. My name is Jess, and on behalf of Mustard Seed Generation, I want to welcome each of you to tonight's fireside chat on preventing burnout in motherhood, the motherhood's mental load. And speaking of the mental load, I know that for many of you, even joining us here tonight was not easy. I'm sure a lot of you rushed through dinner, maybe barely cleaned up if you got a chance to clean up. Maybe you're doing something like folding laundry right now while you're listening. I bet your kids are still asking you for things in the background. I was still getting text messages from my daughter just a minute ago. So I realize, and we all realize that it was not an easy feat and not very simple for you to make it. And so we're very, very glad that you were able to join us. And so I really just want to say from the beginning that we're here. We're glad that you're here and that this space is really for you, exactly for you. We don't want tonight to be about giving moms one more thing to feel guilty about. We don't want to be like, hey, here are 10 more things that you should be doing better that you're not doing, right? We don't want the space to be like that. Most of us already have enough of those kinds of voices telling us all the things that we should be doing that we're not, right? So our hope tonight is a little bit different. We really want to be able to have an honest conversation, but at the same time, we want it to feel practical, right? And be able to talk about the things that we're all carrying, besides the obvious things like work and parenting and juggling those things, but also some of the less obvious things, right? All of that like emotional labor and all of the pressure to hold everything together all the time. The things that maybe we don't necessarily say out loud. And so we want to be able to talk about burnout in a way that also feels culturally relevant, right? Most of us are Korean American in identity, and so we want to bring some of that into what we're doing tonight as well. And we don't want you to leave here tonight thinking, well, that was really nice, but now I have to go back to my actual life, right? We want it to be something that is useful and to help you kind of name all that you're experiencing and hopefully that you can feel less alone. All right, so a quick note about what we're going to do tonight. I'm going to be in conversation with our guest speaker, Dr. Michelle Chung, who I'm going to introduce in just a second, and that'll be the first part of our time, and then we're going to move into a live Q&A. But you are welcome to submit questions in the chat at any time, so please feel free to do that. Also, if your question feels maybe a little bit more personal or confidential than you'd like to share publicly, feel free to send your question directly to either Faith or to Jiwon, and they can pass it along anonymously so that only they see it and then they'll pass it to me. Okay, so without further ado, now I'm very honored to introduce our speaker, Dr. Michelle Chung. Dr. Chung is a clinical psychologist. She works with children, adults, and families, and she has expertise in anxiety, in ADHD and executive functioning, performance psychology, as well as parenting. She got her doctorate in clinical psychology from Long Island University and is taught at Mount Sinai Medical Center, where she also received a teaching award. She's published in peer-reviewed journals and book chapters. She presents for various places like schools and organizations and even Olympic teams, which is pretty cool. She leads her own private practice, InPractice Psychology, it's called, and she also serves on the boards of Your Mom Cares and Korean Community Services. She is the co-founder of the Modern Approach to Parenting, or MAP, which is a nonprofit that offers a culturally informed parenting approach that helps kids to find balance in a high-pressure world. So, Michelle, thank you so much for being with us tonight. As a mom of three kids myself, I am very much looking forward to this conversation, just as much as I think our listeners are. So, Michelle, I think many of us know that we're tired.
There
Um,
are. Hmm.
yeah, and we may not always realize how widespread I think this issue really is. So I was wondering if we could start by having you maybe give us a sense of what you think is the bigger picture. Like, what are we seeing right now in terms of mothers' mental health, right? And why do you think burnout is such an important thing to talk about?
Well, one of the main things that really drew me to even thinking about this topic, frankly, was that there were these studies that were coming out, and I think the most recent one was in 2005. And
Mm.
what they were showing was that there was a 64% relative increase in mothers reporting fair or poor mental health. And when I read that statistic, I thought to myself, could that really be 64% increase?
Mhm.
And so I started to look at it a little bit more. And when I started to dig, I started to see it just the pattern was so apparent. 1 in 5 mothers are affected by maternal mental health conditions, and they're finding that 75% of them go untreated because frankly, they just feel that they can't prioritize themselves in that way. They don't have the time to really
Right.
to seek the support and help that they need or want. um and then I thought this was really interesting, where I saw that Korean Americans, compared to other subgroups of Asian Americans, they have a tendency, or we have a tendency, to wait the longest before seeking any sort of mental health support.
Now, do you think that that Koreanness is also about not being able to prioritize and not having enough time, or do you think that there's that cultural component that maybe adds to that?
There is, I think there's so many layers to this and reasons why this is happening. And there's for sure a very strong cultural component to this as
Sure.
well, right?
Right.
Um, whether it's the modeling that we've seen from maybe some of our own parents and the way that they co-parent and function within a household and a family structure, intergenerational trauma. I mean, there's so many aspects of this.
Sure. So, and I hope that we can really unpack some of that cultural component as we get into this. But going back to this broader landscape that you're talking about, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about why you think all this is happening.
That's a great question. So they're calling this or a lot of people are calling this the invisible load. And what it is that there is a mental and emotional labor that, and I just want to put this out there. We're talking a lot about mothers, but it doesn't necessarily have to only be mothers. It is often the person that is the primary caregiver of the family unit. And so there are
Mhm.
lots of other players in here, but there is an emotional mental labor that is invisible. No one sees it. No one's aware of what's happening, but it is all of that is happening in the back of our minds as we're carrying so much of the weight, right? Of whether it's the kids, the family unit, just making a household run. And
Mhm.
so this is big, frankly, right?
Yeah.
The other thing that I that that I do think a lot of people forget about is what happened in 2000 and 2020, right? Or there was this
Oh,
massive
right.
pandemic,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it threw us all into this state of fight and flight, and this state that is just so out of our norm. And frankly, I was sick of eating my own cooking by the end of lockdown.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember. It's hard to believe that that actually happened. It seems like such a blur sometimes when we talk about it. But yeah, it was a very traumatic time.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And so there was this period of time that, we were, a lot of us were cooking every meal,
Hmm.
um, you know,
Three
trying
times a day.
3 times a day at least, right?
Oh God.
Um, we were running around trying to, figure out how do we get groceries? How do we get toilet paper? All of these things. And I say that we are done with the pandemic, but the pandemic is not done with us, right?
Mm.
There is a reverberation that still exists and a burnout that frankly hasn't really been resolved.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah.
The aftermath of that?
Even for myself, I feel like once the lockdown was lifted and we sort of went back to this, you know, what was trying to get back to this regular life,
Hmm.
there was no point where I could say, oh my goodness, like what happened there? And I just need a beat to be able to catch up and recharge and restore all of that energy that was expended during that really unusual time.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. And a lot of this I do feel like fell on mothers, at least in the personal circles that I'm in. When I would have
Mhm.
conversations, a lot of this would inadvertently fall on moms. I can speak from personal experience. It felt in some ways that my life was flipped upside down, but in some ways, my husband's remained the same. And there was a lot of resentment during that time about how much change and how much disruption I felt I was going through,
Mm.
relatively. Yeah.
I mean, I can absolutely relate to that,
Mhm.
right? Um, I mean, I remember those moments where I was watching my kid do homeschool, trying to do my own work and then, trying to cook and keep a household running. I mean, it was a lot. Yeah.
So, are there other things in this big picture that you might say are contributing factors? I'm hearing you talk about the aftermath of the pandemic. You're talking about the invisible load. Actually, if we could stay with that invisible load, because I think this is a really, really important thing to maybe elaborate on a little bit more. Um, what exactly are we talking about with this invisible load? Why does it become so exhausting? You're talking about a lot of these responsibilities kind of defaulting to moms. What are some examples of the things that we're talking about? Just so I can get everyone on the same page and we know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what is really interesting, and this has a lot to do with just the way the human brain works. It's not about what you're doing per se, but it's about what you're thinking about.
Hmm.
That's really what is taxing. So the way I like, for example, I am, uh, I always joke around to my husband, it must be so nice to only have to look at your own schedule. Because if you look at my calendar, it's like everything that my child has, every after school activity, every doctor's appointment. I mean, I am holding all of those schedules, right? Who's
Yeah.
doing the pickups, all of those things. And the anticipation of the needs of your
Mm-hmm.
family members, whether it's a physical need or an emotional need, there's a way in which there's a lot of mental energy and space that, I'm like, oh, is that okay for his self-esteem? Is he putting too much pressure on himself about homework, or maybe not enough pressure on himself,
Yeah.
about school? There's just so many things that we hold in our heads. And the honest truth is that the brain is sort of like a computer, or even like your phone, right? The invisible load are all of the tabs or the apps that we have going on in the background. And when we have all of that still working in the background, it's taking up the RAM or the memory, and it's sucking the energy. The battery is draining, right?
Absolutely.
The,
Yeah.
those tabs, those apps are still running. They're going, 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 and they're sucking that energy and that space, out of our brains. And frankly, like, we're not closing any of them.
Yeah, I want to add one more layer to that. I don't know, for anyone in the audience who may be a mental health provider as well. When I have these conversations with my husband about the things that I'm thinking about in terms of like, the well-being of our kids, I find that I'm the only one worrying about this stuff, or at least to the extent that I am. And he wants to sort of default to me because he says I am the professional. And so he just assumes that I have it covered. And so he's sort of like off the hook and doesn't have to think about these things. And so that can be very frustrating as well. But I really love this metaphor about all these apps running in the background, all these tabs open in our computer. I think that that's so relatable. I think, you can be sitting somewhere physically, but like in your mind, you're in 10 different places. You are thinking about, what's for dinner, what you're listening to, one of your kids talking to you, but you're also remembering that you need to pick something up on the way home, right? There's also that school form
Mm-hmm.
that's due tomorrow that your husband doesn't know about, but you do, right? I mean, just it goes on and on and on. And meanwhile, from the outside, it just looks like you are sitting there and nothing is happening. But there's all this mental labor that is invisible. So, yeah, it is a lot, and I'm not really sure what to do about that.
Yeah, I think, even for a lot of the mental health providers that are out there and struggling with this. I mean, this is, I always say there's a reason I don't see my own kid in therapy. I can't be objective enough, right? This is it's and just like when I work with especially if I'm doing parenting work, I always tell those clients that I'm working with, I say, you know how easy it is for me to tell you this from this seat, but if you ever see me on the playground, don't judge me.
Or yeah, I know it's hard. They look to us as if we will always have the answers. And at the end of the
Absolutely.
day, we're just another mom. We're another human struggling through this, learning
Exactly.
as we go. Yeah, absolutely. Um,
Exactly.
mhm.
Um, and I think it's sort of the other thing that I was just thinking about the invisible load and all
Mhm.
of the tabs in the background. I think for a lot of us parents are also in what's considered the sandwich generation,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
So we are sandwiched in between taking care of our aging parents, which need our help and support, and then our kids, which are just not old enough to, do things on their own yet. And so we are quite literally also holding the mental load and the emotional load, not only for our children, but also for our parents. So let's just add on another thing to our plate.
Well, I'm going through that now for sure, and I'm in my late 40s, and I think there's a pattern across many of the friends that I have in my age range. It seems like we're all sort of going through this together. So that's the helpful thing is knowing that it's not just me.
Mm,
But really, the need for services for seniors and not having the resources to get the support that you need for your parents. Also, there's the language gaps and the cultural barriers and finding the appropriate services. And so a lot of this, falls on us
hmm
to
hmm
figure these things out. So definitely a real thing that you're naming that is contributing to our burnout. Because
Yes.
depending on what's going on, this could be a daily, a regular role or responsibility that we're carrying.
hmm And what's interesting is that there is a lot of research that shows that women in particular, if you track level of happiness to age, for a lot of men, it's a bell curve, a regular bell curve, right? And it peaks and then just kind of goes down. For women, the the bell curve is inversed. And so
Mm,
what you see is that in midlife, the happiness level actually dips. And what they're finding is that around 47 on average is what the research is showing.
mm.
That's when it dips the lowest. And then hopefully it kind of, starts to rise again in terms of the levels of happiness. And that does have a lot to do with being in the sandwich generation and that invisible load that we carry. And on top of that, for a lot of women, they're going through, there's hormonal changes, you know, uh, menopause, it's a lot that happens in that midlife. And so they are seeing that the average woman has a dip in happiness during that time.
Oh gosh, we could have an entirely separate fireside chat on just perimenopause. This is really blowing up at least two of my friend group chats. This is all we talk about these days. It really is a real thing that affects our concentration, our mood, our energy levels, and so um, yeah, it definitely I think is a huge factor that contributes to this burnout that we're seeing for sure. I also want to pay attention to what's going on in the chat here. It looks like there's a comment here from Joe Kim that CNN has said that in September 2020 alone, is that alone? I can't read this. My eyes are so bad now. 617,000 women left the workforce, and half of these women were between the ages of 35 and 44, which is during the prime stage of their careers. And so this mass exodus impacted women almost 8 times more as men. So this was, during the pandemic, only 78,000 men left work in September. So again, this is another one of those, I guess, disparities we were seeing across genders during the pandemic, right? Where the
Wow.
lives of, 617,000 women were significantly disrupted in a way that it didn't change for men.
My goodness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of the statistic. That's pretty startling.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow. That's, you know,
Hmm.
th- there has been a lot of um, articles written, but also just kind of generally some research coming out just showing even over the I think I just saw an article maybe just earlier this week actually about just rising economic pressures and things just getting more expensive. And one of the big things that they were talking about is childcare.
Yeah,
And so not just the general cost of living, but childcare. And so a lot of women are really contemplating whether it's worth working because the childcare is becoming so extremely expensive.
absolutely. I'm just noticing so far that a lot of the things that you are talking about, as I'm listening to you, is that this isn't necessarily about moms just needing better coping skills. right? What you're actually talking about is that a lot of these needs are actually pointing to structural issues, right? Environmental issues, like childcare is expensive, right? The pandemic that happened, right? Things like this that are going on, and yet moms, especially I would say Korean moms, are still being treated as the default household manager, right? No matter what is going on structurally or systemically. Yeah, I just find that really interesting that what you're talking about so far really isn't about something individual that's going on with us.
So, Jess, I'm so glad that you picked up on that because it is absolutely true. There is a way in which I think as moms, especially, Asian moms, there's a tendency to feel maybe shame or maybe even some guilt around not being able to handle it all. Like, why can't I just do it all and be okay with it?
Right.
And the reality is that it's not that moms are fragile now in any sort of way, or we are fragile in any sort of way, but it's that the stressors are accumulating more and more and more, and there's just no relief. It's like the load that's on our plate is just getting bigger. The mound is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but the plate that's supporting our load is not getting any larger.
Right. Yeah,
And
we can't time manage our way out of this, right? Yeah.
exactly. Yes. And so absolutely there is a systemic issue here that does need to be addressed, whether it's on a macro level, but also it can also be addressed on a very micro level within, each of our individual families too.
Sure. Sure. I mean, I think that's
Mhm.
a pretty good segue actually, and talking a little bit more about our families and family dynamics, especially in terms of the cultural component. Yeah, I want to bring in this, um, the aspect of the Korean Americanness or the immigrant family context a little bit more specifically now.
Mhm.
'Cause I think many of us do come from families where these ideas of things like sacrifice and, not wanting to burden other people, right, are looked at as signs of maturity and strength and good things, right? And I don't want to knock those things because there's a tremendous amount of resilience in these values. And they've helped us, our families, to survive through a lot of things. But sometimes these same values can make it really hard to admit that, hey, you know what, I'm having a really hard time here, or I can't do this. I need some help, right? Without feeling as if you are complaining or without feeling as if you're not somehow capable of handling things, right? And so, yeah, if you could just speak a little bit to what kinds of added layers does this Korean American experience bring to all of this?
There definitely is uh, a big component of this that is layered by these cultural factors.
Mm.
I think what you're speaking to in a certain degree is it's kind of like the Han, right? That a lot of Korean people might carry, that accumulated unspoken kind of grief that you bear, and you don't really complain about it. You just kind of deal with it and you move forward, and that's, again, there's something really sacrificial and that's praised about that in a way, right? In fact, I think a lot of not in a negative way, but I think a lot of us can even look at that and say, hey, that's a strength, that we're able to endure that and still persevere. um I think there is a part of that um is culturally taught. I think we also see it in a lot of our parents and the way that, especially a lot of the parents who have immigrated, right? And we might, I think a lot of us are probably children of the immigrant generation, or have maybe immigrated ourselves. It's that is considered a traumatic experience for a lot of people, right? That if you see all of the stressors and the um learning a different language, getting, all of this stuff is can be really traumatic. But our parents are never going to say it was really traumatic, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so, I think that also then kind of feeds into this whole model minority myth that frankly we all struggle with. Um, I think there's, whether it's I'm, one of the things that I will talk to, like if I ever have a Asian client, one of the first things that I'll say to them is, I was an Asian that wasn't that great at math. And you know what? I survived. Like we made it through, right? Um, and and frankly, this is what I love about, this kind of like Korean American Renaissance that we're having right now. I love it because we're not being, sort of shown in the media as people who are, getting whatever, like math awards and things like that. There's like K-pop demon hunters and BTS and these amazing chefs. I mean, these are people that are breaking the mold in so many ways that is so exciting to see, right? And I feel like it's breaking this myth that we have to be a certain way. We have to kind of put our head down and just work really hard and get to the top. There's so many different paths and different ways and different strengths that we can really celebrate, that I think is so freeing,
Yeah,
more
absolutely.
recently.
I love how you're kind of getting at that constant tension between Korean values and American values, between, the things that we inherited from our parents and also the things that maybe we're trying to do differently with
Hmm.
our own kids, and being conscious of those decisions instead of just being reactive and repeating, right? I see a comment here from Joe again, never saw my mom rest. And so I struggle with resting, right? What was modeled and not modeled for us? Do we just blindly repeat those things, or do we want to choose to do some things differently? And if so, what? And what would that even look like? We have to do these things intentionally. It takes a lot of thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also think that admitting that we're having a hard time can also feel tricky because when we think about our parents, right, and how much that they've been through, you mentioned the word traumatic, right? Yeah, thinking about all of their sacrifice, right? And sometimes it's easy to think to ourselves, wow, they went through so much more than I ever did. So I'm not even in a position to complain. So yeah, how can I even say I'm having a hard time? And so maybe it feels unconsciously to honor all that they've been through, really have to kind of maybe minimize what it is that we're going through. So that I think that it can get really tricky.
Yes, I think that's a huge, huge factor, right? I think there's a and also to add to that, there is this almost this weight that I think a lot of us carry of thinking to ourselves, wow, my family, or or maybe even myself have sacrificed so much and done so much in order to have like a quote unquote better life, whatever that might look like. And then this need to have to fulfill that,
Hmm.
whatever that looks like. It's like I have to make all the sacrifice worth it.
Yeah,
Um,
to redeem their experiences,
yes,
give back.
yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Gosh, yeah, we're carrying so many extra layers of pressure to be a good daughter, be a good mother, good daughter-in-law, good wife, um, good church member, good employee, good neighbor, good friend. It's just endless. These
Mm-hmm.
roles all come with different expectations. Is it possible to do it all? What do you think?
So, what is, I don't only see Asian Americans in my practice, but a lot of Asian clients will come to me because they want an Asian therapist. One of the biggest things that I do see that a lot of my Asian clients struggle with is an underlying perfectionism. And I it what I and this really goes into, I think, this load that we take on as caregivers, because it always makes me chuckle a little bit, because whenever I'm meeting with somebody for the first time and I'm listening to them, and they're I kind of say to them, hey, has anyone ever said you might be a perfectionist? And then the response I will almost always get from every perfectionist type is, but I'm not perfect.
Mm.
I know I'll never be perfect, but it's that oftentimes is what a perfectionist would say, right? Um, and there's a way in which, there's this constant of like, it's not good enough. I need to keep doing more and more and more. That really brings us to that burnout point, right? And I want to also comment here on what I think has added to some of this mental load and stress that we're pressure that we're all feeling, is also the comparison culture that we live in now, right? Whether it's, or even the comparison culture that we might have grown up in, maybe some of our parents might have done that. um Kind of like pointed out, like, well, so and so's getting straight A's, like, why can't you get straight A's, or whatever it might be. But also, obviously, social media is constantly in our face,
Yeah.
showing us just the picture perfect versions of everyone's life. And
Mm.
it's so hard not to look at that and think to yourself, well, that person's able to juggle 1,000 different things, look fantastic on her way out the door, and her 4 kids look perfect, and she has organic dinner on the table every night, right? I mean, it's easy to just look at that and then look at your own life and say, why am I not able to do that?
Yeah,
um
I'm familiar with the research on the impact on mothers, but we do know about the impact on adolescents, especially adolescent girls. Are you familiar at all with the literature on the impact on mothers' mental health? I actually am not familiar with that data at all.
I'm not sure if I have
Yes, but
seen. I'm not sure if I have seen any major studies on that. Although, if anyone in the audience has, like, please share. I would love to hear about it.
Mm,
Um, that's, I think, more just kind of anecdotally what I have heard and seen.
sure.
Hmm.
Well, I'm actually wondering if maybe we can shift the conversation, because I'm being mindful of time, towards maybe talking about some practical steps. I think, when mothers are already burned out, like so many of us are, even talking about something like self-care, right, can feel like just another assignment or another task that we have to take on, right? And so I'd love for you to start to help us think about maybe some really small, realistic steps that maybe we can start doing immediately, right? Do you have anything that you want to share about that?
There's nothing worse than somebody saying you have to care for yourself, that then feels like just another burdensome thing that you have to do. Um, Absolutely. And so I like to keep it here just really simple and really easy. The first step that I always tell people to do is to just name it, and to do it without judgment or shame or guilt. To be
Mm.
able to say, if not to another person, at least to yourself, to be able to say, I am feeling overwhelmed. I am feeling burnt out. I am feeling sad. I am feeling underappreciated. Just being able to put words to it, um, is, it seems like such a small thing, but let me tell you some of this brain science behind it. When you are feeling this feeling, and we've all been there before, it is sitting in the emotional parts of our brain, right? And as we know, emotions have no boundaries, they have no reason, they just are. But when we actually verbally put it into words and do it without judgment or shame, just a fact, I'm struggling right now. What it actually does is that it sort of moves it out of the emotional part of your brain and into the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part. That's the
Mm.
part of your brain where you can actually start to problem solve, to rationalize, to think more logically about how do I move forward from here? Or like, what is it that I can do to make myself feel better? Um,
Yes.
and so it seems like such a simple, simple, simple thing to do, but really there is a method to that madness that really does help and work.
Yes. For the therapists who are listening, or non-therapists, I should say, what we like to say is name it to tame it, right? It's an
Mhm.
easy way to remember this really important concept that Michelle is describing right now. I actually have an example of this. The other night after dinner, I had such a long day and I was up to here already. And
Mm.
I knew I was not in a good space. So sort of announced to my kids, you know what, guys? Mom's feeling very overstimulated right now. And luckily, this is like their favorite word these days. They're like very savvy with the nervous system language these days, thanks to TikTok. I'm like, Mom's feeling very overstimulated right now. And so I really need to decompress. So I am not answering any more questions for the rest of the night. You can check Google Calendar or direct your questions to Dad. I'm going upstairs.
I love it, Jess.
There's limits, right? This is what's going on with me. This is where I'm at. My capacity is here, right? So this is what I need. This is what I'm going to do. These are the expectations. And it's very
Mhm.
clear. And, some people might be listening to that and thinking, wow, but I mean, like, what if they need you for something, right? But I think in the long run, it's better because we are modeling for our kids how to identify, right, what's going on for us. And I think it's important when they see that, oh, wow, my parents have limits too. Like, mom's not a superhero. She's not invincible, right? She has her limits.
Mhm.
And not only that, but she's able to recognize her limits and then communicate to me, right? It's
Mhm.
okay to say that she has limits, right? And so hopefully, my hope is that they'll internalize that and be able to do likewise,
That
as
is great modeling. It's great modeling because that's what you
feel
want.
good in the moment, though. You feel guilt, and then you feel guilty, and then you're like beat
Sure,
yourself up about it, right? But
sure, right. But you can't, what is that saying? You can't pour from an empty cup,
mm, yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And it's so true. You have to be able to protect yourself in that way and to allow yourself to just recharge, restore, right? And just then you pat yourself on the back to be like, I just modeled that for my kids so that they'll be able to do that
Oh.
in their own lives when they need to. And that's powerful.
Well,
That's
so I love this,
powerful.
Michelle. So the naming it is very important. What else do you have for us?
So another big one that I teach all of my clients is I call it share it or shed it.
Okay.
So it's pretty easy. You're either going to share a part of the responsibility and un unload it onto somebody else, right? So just even picking one small thing that is adding to your mental load, and you're going to hand it off to, it could be your child if it's age appropriate, or your partner, whomever, a nanny. Hey, can you figure out how to, the after school pickup?
Yeah.
For my kid or for our kid or whatever it might be. Can you figure out how to get all the groceries ready for this party we're having this weekend,
Yeah.
right? So just really being able to share some of that mental load so it's not all on you, right?
Absolutely. I can attest to this that a few years back, I told my husband, you know what? I need you, starting from now on, to take over all of their sports registrations and all of the communication about their sports from now on. And he was like, okay, sure, I got it. I'm like, okay, great. Then a few weeks later, he was like, oh my gosh, this is such a pain in the neck. This is ridiculous. There's so many different platforms and so many, it's just
Yep.
crazy. I'm like, now you get it, right? And I
Yes.
was grateful to be able to take that off of my plate. So I absolutely agree with you. And it made a big difference. I felt it right away. I felt lighter. I felt like less headaches, right? So yeah, I mean, if you can think of something like that, that's feasible, I absolutely please go for it. It's
Yes.
definitely,
It's funny that you brought that example up because that's exactly what I did too with my husband. I kind of told him, I was like, you need to just take care of all this sports stuff because it's overwhelming. I needed to share that, you know, with somebody, with him to take that responsibility off. Um, or like, in our partnership too, it's kind of like, on the Fridays when we're home together and we're having dinner, you know, it is his responsibility to figure out what's happening Friday night dinner.
Mhm.
I that's like the night I am not going to think about it at all. Um, and so just being able to really share that mental load with
Yeah,
somebody, and not everyone has a partner, and I understand that. And it could be sharing it with I mean, frankly, even sometimes with friends, or um like I said, with kids. I mean, kids can do chores,
absolutely. Yeah.
they're
The beautiful thing once you discover that, highly
yes,
encourage people to try it.
absolutely, and they're good at it, and you're helping them build competence and you know uh self-confidence,
Yeah.
the sense of autonomy. I mean, these are all good things that come from having a kid do some dishes or
I think
taking
that's
a
a really important point for anyone who's feeling guilty about, making your kids do chores. I think Michelle is raising a really good point, is that it's actually good for them, right? And
Mhm.
helping them to develop a sense of responsibility and autonomy. I have a comment here that I just want to share real quick.
Yeah.
Soo Young says, my teen boys take turns doing dishes twice a week. This is the first week, and I have been a more pleasant person to be around in the evening. There you go. So it's already helping with mood, right? So,
Yes.
so that's great. Um, you know,
Even the smallest, oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to
no,
say,
no.
even the smallest little things really do make a difference.
hmm Um, I want to be mindful of time, but I also think that there's another really important point that you are shedding light on with this idea of this share it or shed it, you said?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
So,
that the point about why is it even something that's all ours to begin with? I think that that is something very I don't know, more at the core of the issue. It makes me think about an example real quickly. I'll share years ago when the kids were much younger. I remember after dinner, my husband would try to be helpful and say to the kids, okay, let's help mom clean up. And I would get so irate because, and he had great intentions, right? But after the kids, they were upstairs and later we were alone. I'm like, why is it that pitching in to clean up the house that we all live in is being framed as helping mom? Right. I mean, there is something fundamentally wrong with that framing, right? And we had this conversation multiple times before he finally got it. And he doesn't do this anymore. But it took a few talks about it to really help him realize that this was a huge blind spot for him and that we've all been
yeah,
so conditioned by these, patriarchal norms.
absolutely. And I think that is such a good example because that just shows how it's done in a way that is not malicious, right?
Mhm.
It's done in a way that it is so um it's so subtle, right?
Yeah.
That sometimes you know people don't even notice it, right? Um I you know I actually have I'm just going to go back to share it or shed it for a second. The second part that I think is really important is the shed it part. which is really saying, hey, if you want to think about what's really important, because if it's not that important,
Mhm.
just shed it.
Mm.
Just shed it. Because it's going to just be a tab that's running in the background, and you might not need that tab to be going.
Sure. Is there an example so that people have an idea of what type of a thing you might have in mind as something that maybe we can shed?
So this is so um like a subtle example, but like I had actually, this is something that has come up multiple times, which I think is kind of funny. But in terms of for example, I want my kids to look a certain way, dress a certain way, wear a certain type of clothing.
Ah, okay.
Like,
Okay.
okay, how important is that for you? Because that's taking up space, right?
Mhm.
I want my kid to only and always eat organic food, right? Like, okay, that's wonderful intention, and I'm not against anyone who feeds their kid all organic foods, but again, it's like, okay, how important is that going to be for you to keep that tab open,
Yeah.
right? Um, you know, I mean, I have some parents that are thinking about things that are 20 steps ahead,
Mm.
right? And sometimes, I just want to say to them, and I do say to them, hey, is that a tab that's worth keeping open right now?
Yeah.
Because there's 20 different things that could happen before we get to that one result,
Sure. Well, I'm
right?
thinking about certain activities that my kids were involved in that they didn't really enjoy, but that I thought would be good for them, right? Those are some of the things that I had to learn to let go because
Oh,
ours
yeah.
so overloaded that I thought, why are we doing this again? What is it that I'm trying to accomplish here? Right? If they're miserable and I'm miserable, right? And it's
Yes.
expensive and it's time sucking.
Yes.
I'm sorry, what am I doing here again? Right? And so some of those things come to mind when you're talking about what to shed. That's how I did
No,
to
I
shed.
even have an example of that where my kid frankly doesn't, he doesn't love or gravitate towards team sports. And for me, I always, this is like part of my upbringing, right? I valued team sports and I made great friendships and all that stuff. And so growing up, I used to really push him towards team sports all the time. And he, frankly, never loved it because he never loved it. He never really tried that hard. He never really got really good at them. And then it was just kind of like, what am I doing here? Like, what am I doing? And so that was one of the things where I decided, okay, I'm shedding this, you know. Um,
Sharing is maybe one of the metrics that maybe we should pay closer attention to is what is actually bringing us enjoyment and fulfillment, right? And what is not.
mhm, mhm,
It's a good
absolutely.
guidepost, right? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
No, I was just thinking, and it kind of made me think a second, something you said a little earlier today, which is about how you sometimes will have conversations with your friends about this, and there's like a similarity and a connection on some of these feelings. And I think that is something that I really urge a lot of us to do, and for mental health providers that are working with some of these parents to encourage them to do. I really do think that sense of community or at least connection, it reduces levels of shame and guilt, right? It's validating for a lot of us to know, hey, we're not alone and other people are experiencing something similar. Um, I think it's really important for all of us to be able to connect with other people who might be going through a similar struggle, and to allow us to be able to say like this, I'm not weak for having this struggle or these feelings. Um, and so to really encourage.
Sure, to feel and also to feel just less isolated in all of this. So, you're talking about naming what's going on. You're talking about finding community, right? And connecting with others around some of these shared experiences. And you're talking about sharing some of this burden or shedding some of these.
Mhm.
Is there anything that you would add before we transition into our live Q&A?
And I think this the last part that I would really want to highlight here is that I think we forget to do something that is restorative for us at least just once a day. And it doesn't have to be a massage or like a spa day. It doesn't have to be such a production. But it needs to be something that we do every day that restores or recharges us. And that could be anything from like, it could be a prayer for those of us that are Christian out there. It could just, it could be 10 minutes of just sitting in silence, maybe taking an extra long shower that day where no one is bothering you, um, going for a walk or to the gym. And I think a lot of times parents will say to me, well, I watch my favorite TV show, and that could be restorative.
Mhm.
Sometimes I will say that for people who scroll through social media, um, or certain things like that, that sometimes is not the most restorative thing to do. Um,
It's more of
because
an
I'm sorry.
you're more escaping or numbing
Yes,
than really filling yourself up with something.
exactly. Exactly. But I think it's, you need a time of day where like you're not necessarily focused on being efficient or productive, but it's just really for you.
Yeah, I learned this the hard way when I was on medical leave earlier this year. It's a long story, but literally I was forced to stop working and pause, and it really created more space for me to seek out like intentional forms of rest. And so,
Mhm.
one way that I found to actually restore energy for myself was to start to begin getting into the habit of asking myself every day, what is something small that is fun and realistic that I actually want to do today? Right. And it's a question that it was so foreign to me. Like I'm not used to thinking that way. Who has time to think about fun? Right. Like this is how I am. It's just like, go, 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 go. And so I was really trying to cultivate a practice of thinking about that on purpose every day. And interestingly, that simple question really brought me into sketching one morning. And it was something that I hadn't done in decades. And when I thought about that, it made me so sad. It made me like grieve like all those years that I had lost to channeling things that felt creative to me that I had just ignored. And so I think sometimes, at least for me, what I found was that rest was found in kind of like revisiting some of the things that I used to like to do when I was little or when I was younger, and kind of reconnecting to those lost parts of ourselves. So I think that could also be a really important way that we find restoration and rest. So I just wanted to throw that in there
I
and
love that. I love that. I like to ask myself at the end, like just kind of thinking about was my day like productive or, whatever you want to call it. I always ask, did I do something that I had to do? Did I do something that I uh should do? Maybe something I would rather avoid, but I should do. And then did I do something that I wanted to do?
I love that.
Mhm.
Love, love, love that. Thank you, Michelle. We're going to move into Q&A now because it's 9 o'clock. For those of you joining us, could you place your questions in the chat? I can see that there are already a few questions in the chat. Again, if your question feels like it's too personal, please just send it directly to Faith or Chi-One, and then I'll get it that way anonymously. Let me just see what we have here. Let me scroll back a little bit farther up here. Okay, so, oh, well, there's more of a comment here. Now add the AI frenzy that's interjecting already overwhelmed human, family, relational, mental spaces. Being a good Korean American working mom, I feel like I have to be now AI savvy. What are some self dialogue that I can use to tame high expectations on myself as a mom, as a professional, as a human being? It's
I
a lot
think
of
that's
question.
this is a really good question. And I think this self-dialogue is really so important, especially as a mom, because I think that a lot of times this self-dialogue also becomes our outer dialogue. Um, and I think that um, and just kind of being a mom, it's also possibly what your children also hear around you.
Absolutely.
um I mean, this AI frenzy is interesting, and I think it's just an example of some of this expectation that we all are putting on ourselves to be on top of things and to just continue to evolve all the time. And I think the one of and I just like really concrete strategies here. So I'm just kind of giving you some really concrete steps. One of the things that you can ask yourself is, you know, um, there are ways that you want. Okay, it, there's a lot of research that shows the positive to negative comments and thoughts actually
Mm,
are weighed very differently, right?
mhm.
Some research has showed 3 to 1, some have shown 5 to 1. But what you're really looking at is, that the positive comments, it's either 3 or 5, are weighted to the same as one negative comment, right?
Yeah.
So that self-dialogue, I want you to ask yourself, like, hey, what are just 3 things that I felt positive about, or I feel like I can be proud of that I did today? you
Mm,
know, and then you can even just think to yourself, okay, what's one thing that I might want to do differently tomorrow?
mhm. I love
And
that.
it's
That's very
it's
practical.
very practical, and it's just, it's you just want to chip away at this in a like a way that actually is sustainable and a way that you're going to actually be able to do, because frankly the high expectations, they'll always sort of be there a little bit in the background. And so your work here, your journey is going to be like, okay, how do I at least balance it a little
Sure.
bit more?
And we're
Mhm.
reprogramming ourselves. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. Another question here is from Lori. I struggle a lot with asking for help, having grown up in an immigrant household raised by my grandparents. I'm pregnant with my first child right now, and having a hard time asking for help has made points of this season really hard. I'm
Mm.
working on it, but I'm worried about how this may continue in my parenting. Do you have any advice about working through this?
So this is something I think, Lori, it's so relatable to so many of us. Asking for help is at times can be a very vulnerable thing. It puts us in a vulnerable place. And mostly because, I think there's a fear of judgment, right? Whether you're judging yourself or you're judging other people may judge you. but sometimes there's also a fear of getting rejected. Like you might be asking for the help, but maybe you might not receive it, and you're not so confident of that. We're not confident of that. And so there's, I think there's so many different reasons why it is a struggle to ask for help. I think the thing here that I want to make sure that we all hear and take home with us is that we're supposed to ask for help. As human beings, we were not meant and designed to stand alone. In fact, we were designed to lean on each other and to be in community with one another in order for pure survival.
Yeah.
Right. And so this, it's like to be able to say, actually, the right thing to do is to ask for help. Right. And now,
It's also
obviously,
your baby.
mhm,
Community. Mhm.
absolutely. Just like, yes, 100%. And, doing this is not going to change overnight, right? But I feel like, especially as you're now, I think being pregnant, you're sort of at a place where, I think there's a lot of reflection and time for thinking during this next kind of like transitional phase into this next stage of your life. I think this is a great opportunity to just like, let's start small, in the smallest way. Hey, I am feeling really heavy and bloated, and I can't pick up that box.
Yeah.
Can somebody help me pick up that box? Or just the smallest little ways, just to practice it and get a little bit more comfortable with doing that. And this is your opportunity to be able to do that, because I'm hoping that once the baby comes, like you'll be able to ask for all the help that you need, because it frankly, it is a lot of work.
I love how we have questions and concerns from moms and moms to be, right? At all life
Mhm.
stages. I think this is really wonderful. I also wanted to add Joe's comment here. Lori, congratulations and thank you for sharing. I wonder if you could reframe, quote, asking for help as a way of inviting and allowing others to partake in your pregnancy with you. It's hard for the rest of the family to experience what you're experiencing in your body. And inviting others to help you is, in essence, allowing them to experience your growing baby's needs with you. Another way of saying this is by not asking for help, you could be depriving others of sharing a precious, life-changing experience with you. Yeah, so really, the way that we frame it too can also be very, very critical.
I love
Let's,
that.
yeah, what other questions are in here? I love when you said you can't pour from an empty cup, but how do we actually check how full our cup is? How do we know what fills it, what drains it? What do we truly need more of? Hmm. Yeah,
This
good
is
question.
a really good question. And I think one of the first things that I ask a lot of people to do is to reflect on your values and priorities, because and there are these wonderful values exercises out there. A lot of them are actually even free, which is fantastic.
Mhm.
They this is really sort of the compass of your life. And if you are filling your time, your your whether it's emotional space, physical space, and your resources into filling most of these values and priorities that are important to you, then you know that you are filling your cup, right?
Mhm.
Um, but also it's oftentimes it's a feeling. Like you will know that feeling of feeling appreciated, for example, or somebody seeing you, in a moment where maybe you're struggling, or or sharing in good news that you might have about yourself and genuinely being happy with you and celebrating with you. These are all sort of feelings and emotions and connections that we have with others, that you'll sort of feel this restorative, sort of filling feeling of your cup. And sometimes that's even things like pride in yourself and feeling good about, whether it's something you did well, or maybe it's a struggle that you've overcome and you feel stronger and resilient for. I mean, these are all ways that your cup is being filled.
Yeah, I love that. Um, Looking at the chat here, there's a question. How can I, this is really a boundaries question. How can I not be so resentful when I'm consistently being asked at home and at work to always be the one to help everyone? So it's not about asking for help, but holding boundaries.
Yeah,
Yeah.
resentment it's a tricky feeling because it eats you up inside. It's one of those feelings.
Hmm.
Um, and it grows if we don't do something, about that, right? And so what I will say is, um, I think resentment is definitely one of those feelings that you when you start to feel it, it is important that you do acknowledge that feeling, and then you create different boundaries for yourself, right? Because that's the part that you frankly have control over, right? And it is okay if boundaries change throughout your life at all times. And it is okay to tell people, hey, this was, maybe this felt okay before. I thought it was going to be okay, but it's not anymore. This is a different boundary. And so when you're, whether it's at work or within your family, it is okay to speak up and say, hey, this doesn't feel good anymore.
Mm.
And to really, now I think a lot of people who start to draw boundaries for the first time, there's a way in which you, I think, go almost, there's like a very black and whiteness to it, where there's an extreme way that people are kind of like, I'm just going to cut this person off, or, I'm not going to do this anymore. But sometimes in reality, that you can't do that. Like, for example, at work, you might not be able to do that, right? You can't say, I'm feeling resentful because I started this project and I said I was going to take responsibility, but now I'm just going to stop doing it, right?
Mhm.
Um, so there's sort of a middle pathway that you can hold a boundary, but then still be able to, navigate a situation that's not going to just completely cut something off or have some sort of consequence that is so negative,
Sure.
right? And I think there it's a nuance that you'll have to find, but there definitely, it's really important to be able to communicate that, you
Mhm.
know, in a way that you're saying, hey, this is what's happening, this is what I'm feeling, and then assert yourself, or to ask, like, this is what I need to happen, this is what I need to change, and it's going to help me and you out in the end in this particular way.
Yeah, I love that. I think this is a nice actually segue into this other question here that I'm seeing, where sometimes burnout can overlap with other things like depression or anxiety. And many people wait until things are really, really extreme before getting help. So, how does someone know when it might be time to seek more professional help?
This is a really good question. um I think, especially burnout is something that it happens over time. It's not necessarily something that'll just happen overnight. So it is something that, if you start to notice, just like most things in life, the earlier you do something about it, the better, right? And you're starting to feel burnout, you're starting to feel a little overrun, try and take it easy during the weekends, and if you can't do it during the whole weekend, like, just find a few moments. And this is where, I always talk about bang for your buck ways to kind of restore or to find some energy. Like, our brains are not made to do multiple things at a time. Even if you could just sit there and just focus on one thing, that actually can give your brain a little bit of rest. So even if it's small, those small little resets throughout your day can really help. And so, I just like, I want you to kind of think of it in that way. And when you start to feel that, instead of, it's like, oh, this week was really tough and I feel burnt out, but if it starts to feel more chronic and more persistent, if it starts to affect your level of or ability to function and your level of function, um, I always say look for three major things: sleep, sleep or energy level, loss of interest in things that used to be uh, something that would bring you joy or excitement, and then looking at kind of appetite as well. If you see these changes and you're starting to notice, hey, it's been over 2 weeks that it's been pretty persistent and it hasn't really been budging, this feeling, that is usually when I would encourage you to really go and just get evaluated by a medical doctor or a psychiatrist or a psychologist, some sort of professional. Because if I were to be honest with you, yes, it could be burnout and depression, absolutely. But there could also be a myriad of other things that could be happening that's causing some of these symptoms. Like I do know that some people it might lead to like a thyroid deficiency, or, some sort of hormonal thing. Um, you know, just to get it evaluated to see what's happening. It doesn't mean that it's all mental health related. You want to really get it looked at and see what's happening here, what's creating this shift.
Sure. Really important question and great information there, Michelle. We have another question in the chat. I have a different question since we were talking about our Korean identity. A lot of the invisible load in my life as a mother, wife, daughter-in-law comes from knowing and balancing the different expectations that my first gen parents and in-laws have, the expectations I have as a 1.5 gen Korean American, and the expectations my husband has as a second generation Korean American. Yeah, it's complicated. We all
Yeah.
seem to speak, quote, Korean, but we're often expressing very different needs and nuances. What are some helpful strategies for managing and balancing everyone's expectations while communicating in a clear yet culturally competent way? That's
Ooh,
complicated. Yeah.
yeah, this is definitely this is a doozy to, I think, try and balance.
Relatable
So
though, right?
it's so incredibly relatable. And let's talk about invisible mental load.
Mm.
I mean, there it is,
Yeah,
right? Um, the one thing that I will say, and I think a lot of us don't want to hear it, but it is the truth, is that we are not going to meet everyone's expectations all the time.
absolutely.
And I think the quicker we are able to just really accept that fact, the more peace that we can make with this.
Yes.
Um, because when there are competing expectations, I mean, frankly, there's no winner all the time, right? And so I think we are going to, and I think I'm sort of going to go back to the values again and priorities. I think it's important for all of us as individuals to really think about what's important to us. Like, what are our values that we want to adhere to and live our lives by? Because if we're constantly chasing other people's expectations and what they want of us, then there's no space for ourselves, right? Our true self and how we want to be and how we want to live our lives. Now, obviously, there are going to be moments where, yes, I mean, yes, I'm going to share something here personally. Um, my in-law family, right? They have a tendency to be a little bit more traditionally Korean. Let's put it that way, right? Like I will sometimes go with that expectation, knowing that that's what's expected of me, right? And it just kind of is what it is, you know. And I will come home and my husband will massage my feet because, I was on my feet for hours and hours and hours, doing meeting certain expectations, right? I mean, there are certain points where you will need to decide, right? Like is it worth kind of communicating that and whatever the consequences to communicate that I don't want to be on my feet for the next 5 hours, you know? Or is it just, is it more important that, you just kind of like, in my case, it's kind of playing the role and then living my life the way that I want to when I come home to my own home, right? Um, I think again, really kind of going back to your own inner values, like what's important, what's your priority, and being able to communicate that in a culturally competent way is frankly incredibly difficult because the expectations are so different, right? Um, whether especially to maybe the in-laws, the first gen parents, right? Um, it's just what they expect of you is different. But I like to think about what's most effective, right? How do I communicate my needs in a way that they can hear it and they'll be most likely to follow through on it?
In my family, the strategy that my husband and I use is I'm responsible for protecting him with my parents, and he's responsible for protecting me with his parents. And so we understand that, and I think that helps to kind of buffer some of those tension points. It's a really practical kind of agreement, but one little nugget that I did want to leave. I know it's not everything, but it is something that has helped and make a significant difference in my own family. But it is 9:24, and so I'm going to shift gears here. Michelle, thank you so much. This conversation, I think, has been really, really validating, and I hope really practical for some of our listeners. I think what I'm taking away is that motherhood is hard and that burnout or this idea of burnout is not a personal failure, right? I think we made that very clear, I think, from the beginning. Really, it's a result of a lot of complicated factors, a lot of systemic issues, right? That really normalize the kind of culture that makes it okay for us to carry too much all the time, for too long without enough rest and support, which is not okay. So hopefully this conversation has been helpful to folks, but I'm wondering right before we close, Michelle, is there just one quick final word of encouragement that you just want to leave for some moms tonight before we hand it over to Chiwon?
Yeah, I think the thing here that I want everyone to take away from is that, you're not alone, right? And it is, I think, harder than everyone wants to admit. Um, and just to be able to start small and take some really, take some of these steps to be able to create some more space for yourself, and your needs, and that is okay.
Yes, it is okay. Thank you, everyone who joined us tonight. We know how busy you are. We know, and we're grateful that you showed up and made time for us. So I'm going to turn it over to Chiwa now for final announcements and ways to stay connected with MSG. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. I have to say, throughout the session, my 8-month-old baby has been crying quite a lot in the background. So honestly, like what you shared resonated with me even more in real time. And I'm sure many parents and caregivers here could relate as well. And we are really thankful for your honesty, wisdom, and encouragement shared with us tonight. And thank you again, Jess, for thoughtfully guiding the conversation. We'd love to share a few resources from Mustard Seed Generation. On our website, you can find the National Directory of Korean American Mental Professionals, along with bilingual blog posts, podcasts, and research reports focused on Korean American mental health and culturally responsive care. We would love you to continue journeying with us throughout our May series, where we will be holding more conversations. On May 18th, we will be joined by Young-sang Ryu, and for a conversation called Another Way to Live, a Korean American Journey, Moving the Rock Made for Him. Young will be sharing his personal journey, and please note that this session won't be recorded. Then on May 20th, Sunny, a licensed marriage and family therapist and mother of 3, will lead a session called Learning to Be Held so we can hold others. She will reflect on motherhood, nervous system regulation, and how to take care of the infants and younger childs as well. And on May 27th, we will be hosting a Korean language session with Dr. Haewon Shin on advanced care and financial planning, including how to navigate these important conversations with loved ones in culturally meaningful ways. So we would love you to join us of any of these upcoming conversations, and you can find more information by scanning what you can see in the slide. And before we end, we just want to mention that MSG is a nonprofit organization, and events like these are made possible through community support. If tonight's session was meaningful to you, we would really appreciate any donation, big or small, to help us continue creating mental health resources and conversations for the Korean American community. Thank you again for spending the evening with us. Please take gentle care of yourself and of one another, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you, everyone. Good night.